But there's a difference between being a helpless fish against Curtis Blades and Jailton Almeida and just some guy. And at present, Shamil Gaziev is just some guy. Have I given that enough time? I think I've given that enough time. And respect. Shite fight. Everyone involved should be embarrassed. Never want to see Jairzinho Rosenstruck fight. It's always a chore. And if he turns up and he does something interesting, it's worse because you know he can't keep that form. He'll go straight back to being fucking boring. But they'll keep jamming him in headliners because that's the era we're in. Amazing stat was going around on Reddit and Twitter. He has more main events than any UFC champion, with the exception of John Jones, who we don't consider the UFC champion in any division at the moment. So let's do something a little bit more fun. Umar Nurmagomedov. He's in a fight against some unknown. I haven't watched Bezkat Almakhan's fights. I don't know if he is good or if he is an Almakhan. Bruh. But Umar Nurmagomedov has a lot of talk around him. On this show, we like to be a bit silly, but I do like to bring a little bit of realism. He is not being ducked by everyone. Not by any means. This is the Ali Abdelaziz move to claim that you're being ducked. And then they said, I think Dana came out and said they are having a hard time getting him fights. It's like, well, at this point, he's pulled out of more fights than he's had. I get, like, maybe he doesn't suffer because he's, his cousin and best friend Habib is rich. He gets to hang out with Kadyrov and people like that. They're very well respected up there, that team, back in their homeland. But people like Nathaniel Wood, who are living in England, where you can't get a Magnus for under £6 now, can't afford to train for fights and then not have them. You don't get paid. Nathaniel Wood signed to fight him, and Umar Nurmagomedov pulled out. The three best fighters who've signed to fight him, Jack Shaw, Nathaniel Wood, Corey Sandhagen, Umar Nurmagomedov has pulled out of those fights. But he's found time to fight all the other guys. Now, I had a debate with someone on Reddit the other day who was like, yeah, but when he was fighting so-and-so, it was because his uncle died, he had to pull out. And when he was fighting so-and-so, it's because he hurt his shoulder and he had to pull out. It's like, well, fighters fight injured all the time. And fighters fight with bereavements all the time. I'm not saying he should or had to. In fact, the fact that he didn't probably means that he didn't have to financially. But, it doesn't matter how legitimate your reasons are for pulling out. You are still pulling out regularly. This dude was trying to convince me that, like, his pullouts don't count versus everyone else's. It's like, no, everyone else pulls out for those reasons too. It's just that if you do it all the time, you're a liability and no one's going to sign to fight you. So yeah, there's that. But as a fighter, he's pretty good. Unfortunately, not an awful lot of tape of him against decent opponents. But I watched a couple of his early ones in Fight Nights Global, and I watched Sergey Morozov, Brian Kelleher, Nate Maness, and Rani Barcelos. His 4 fights in the UFC. I thought one of the better performances against him was his first opponent, Sergey Morozov, who's on a... What's he doing at the moment? Oh, he's on a 3-1 run since then, with the loss being to Douglas Silva de Andrade, who is obviously tough as nails and made out of teak. But I was going to write something about this, and then I didn't because it was getting close to podcast time, so I thought, I'll just talk about it on the podcast. But a few things that interest me about Umar Nurmagomedov. There is a real similarity with Usman Nurmagomedov, and it would be quite easy to get them confused. Both of them love flicky high kicks from long range, and that weird teep where they bring it up and they put like it's a slow draw up, and then they push the kick out fast. And it's really weird to watch, but it's also really cool, and it catches people off guard. It's like, as sort of a showboating move, Guillermo Rigondeaux used to start throwing a combination at like half speed and then speed up the punches halfway through. So he'd be going against your guard, your cover-up. He'd be going tap, 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 tap. And that really caught people out. Changes of rhythm do catch people out, but to do it in the middle of a technique is very cool. Reminds me of, actually something Islam Makhachev does, which I also used Nazim Hamid as an example of, but throwing a punch or showing one punch and changing the trajectory of the punch after you've started moving. So what brought that discussion up last time was Islam Makhachev against Volk. Volk was reaching to parry his left straight because Volk's orthodox, he's southpaw. So he's leaving a big gap behind his right hand. And so Islam turned his shoulder in as if to throw the left straight and then allowed his hand to whip out wide. And it's pretty weak as a punch, but you catch him clean on the chin, if you go behind their parry. So he does this long loopy hook. which he threw a couple of times in their first fight. Definitely worth checking out. And Nazim Hamed was a master of changing punch or showing one punch and throwing another one off the same hand that was completely different. I think his fight with Steve Robinson knocks him down with an uppercut that looks like an overhand, and he was very good at showing the straight and throwing the overhand instead, like looping it around the side. And like an overhand in the sense that it's kind of broken. You're not, the power of a punch comes from momentum. You go from the floor to your hips, to your shoulders, to your arm, and you whip it in, and you have to time all the components together to get the power. Kinetic chains, if you will. Or fascia, that's what we're all talking about now. Which, if it exists, is very important. Or the myofascial system. That's the one that everyone's always on about. But by breaking the punch like that, you lose a lot of the power, and you're throwing sort of a loopy punch that's weaker than the straight punch you would have thrown, but you're catching people because you've got them looking at one thing and then throwing another. So that's what they do with their push kicks. They pick them up, and they can turn them over into high kicks too. DC, every Umar Nurmagomedov fight, it's, you've got to see this guy's question mark kick, blah, blah, blah. Interesting thing that Khabib said about him, he said to be a really elite fighter, he would have to get his boxing up to a better level. And watching his hands, they are a bit of an auxiliary weapon. And of course, you don't need to be able to punch to be a world champion in MMA. You don't need to be you don't need to be able to punch well to be a world champion in the striking in MMA. You could be a striking-based fighter, but focus on your kicks and then your elbows and knees and using the clinch and all sorts of other stuff. I think with these things, it's really interesting to break them down because because they all come from the same camp and because they all rock the same facial hair and there's a real visual similarity, there seems to be this thing where everyone just treats the Dagestani top team or whatever they're called the same. And it was that way with Islam Makhachev and Khabib. People thought that they were the same person. You're going, very different fighting styles. Lots of tricks that are similar, but very different fighting styles. And Umar and Usman are certainly much closer to my eye, fighting style-wise. But even within the striking to grappling ratios, which is mostly what people use to differentiate them. Obviously, Khabib all grappling all the time, and Islam Makhachev much more methodical and studied on the feet. But even within the grappling, you'll see differences and tendencies within them. And I think Umar's a really interesting one because with Khabib and Islam, when they get the back body lock, it's mat returns, it's controlling the hands and hitting, and then it's mat returns. It's allowing the guy to try and get up, tripping him back to the mat, punching him some more, wearing him out. And there's always that long wearing out period. And then it's later in the fight for Khabib that he drags you back over your heels, gets on your back and tries for the rear naked choke. Think of McGregor or Poirier. And that's just following the logic of MMA. In MMA, as we were talking about last week, side control gives you less ability to lock the opponent down and tire him out than half guard. Yes, it opens up a lot of stuff for you submissions-wise and positional improvement-wise. You can get to the mounted crucifix and so on, but the value of the half guard often outweighs that. And certainly it's not like finishing moves and stuff, but passing guard and moving to side control and mount and stuff, that certainly works better later in the fight if you've already tired the guy out and you put a beating on him. If you're in half guard, you're already wearing on him, you've got your weight pressing down on him and so on. So, yeah, there's always been a lot of sense to that. Hold him in the position where he's having more trouble escaping. You don't want to end up with him wrestling up and you having to do the work again. And with the back, there's a similar thing. People for ages in MMA would get in behind people in the turtle, putting their hooks in, jumping on the back, going for the choke, not being able to because, well, firstly, it's hard to get a choke on people anyway if they're decent. If they're fighting your hands all the time, it's really hard. And you don't have any weapons to effectively strike with. You can go heel strike to the solar plexus if you've got good hip dexterity and leg dexterity, but that's about it. Your punches are crap from the back, unless you've got them belly down. But yeah, you jump on the back, they roll over so that your back is on the mat, and you're both looking up at the ceiling. And then it's not, all that wearing on him, all that putting your weight on him and stuff, that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe if you get a body triangle on him, that tires him out a bit, but it's very easy and reasonable to expect that they will at some point turn back into you and you'll be on the bottom. So there's always been this prioritizing of staying on top, staying behind, controlling wrist, hitting the head. And other people work in different ways. Fluffy Hernandez loves to hold the far ankle and the back of the head with his hands, push the guy onto their hands and knee him in the body, and then go for that, interesting guillotine, seated katagatami or whatever. But there's a lot of ways of attacking it in a way where you don't end up on the bottom, ideally. Umar Nurmagomedov is kind of different because he gets behind people and he jumps on their back as early as possible. And while he was made to pay for this, sort of, in a way, as in like his opponent got away and back up to the feet against Sergei Morozov, he still does it. He still hunts the back from really early on and jumps on people's backs. I think it was the Kelleher fight where he almost ends up going over the top of him. And in the Sergei Morozov fight, he does go over the top of him. And I think that one of the other interesting tendencies within that tendency is that he pulls people back on top of him to get on their back a lot of the time. So in the Morozov fight, he ends up in those positions, much like Alejandro Pantoja, where he pulls the guy back and he ends up in sort of a crab ride where he's underneath the guy with butterfly hooks in from behind. And against Morozov, Morozov was able to scramble and Umar wasn't able to control it that well. Whereas, obviously, when Pantoja does it, he comes up on leg drags and things. He's always threatening to pass your guard and flatten you out or get on your back, as opposed to just like pulling you backwards and going, come on, I'm getting on your back and I'm going to choke you. But the reason that Umar loves hunting the back is that he loves the rear naked choke and he's made it something of a specialty. I say something of a specialty. I've always said like the rear naked choke doesn't really tell you how a match went, because if a guy gets knocked down and he's like reeling and you jump on his back and choke him, that's one way to get a rear naked choke. Or you could, methodically jail Tanal Maida your way to their back and strangle them that way. You could have to fight hands for, the 2 or 3 minutes. But he's got 9 finishes and 6 of them came by rear naked choke. That's all you need to know. And one of the ways that he picks it up really well is along the fence. This is how he caught Morozov, and I believe it's how he caught Kelleher. Yes, both of those guys. He gets you down on your hands and knees along the fence, or like takes you down along the fence so that your weight is on one of your hands, and he'll get one hook in or both hooks in, and he'll drape both arms over your shoulders, so nothing underneath, which can be bad if the guy hops up and tripods, because you'll slide over the top of him. But he tends to do it when they're crawling their way up in an unathletic position, and then the hand that's along the fence is often the one that they'll have their weight on. So he gets their weight on the hand along the fence, and he punches them in the head a couple of times on that side, and then he gets a cross grip with the hand that's on the fence side. He gets their other hand, pushes it down and punches his free hand over and gets the choke. So it's in effect the same as one of those hand traps from the back, in the grappling sense, where you trap their hand with your leg so that you've got 2 hands working for a choke while they've got 1 hand free to defend themselves. Except instead of trapping it physically, he's just kept the hand weighted. Because nobody wants to get flattened out along the fence. You're always in a better position if you're up working towards getting up than if you're flattened out along the fence. It's just that creates that vulnerability for the hand to sneak through around the neck. So that's really cool. His striking on the feet is a lot of high kicks that don't connect or connect on arms and shoulders, and body kicks on the open side. He will switch stances to get an open stance scenario and then body kick you, and then front kicks. The high kicks tend to work well if he's got a guy who's going to lunge forward. He gets into a closed stance, and then he throws up the lead leg high kick as he slides back, like Haggerty used to before he found out he had power in his hand. Caught Nate Maness with one of those really nicely. But I think this is the thing. People are looking at this, both Umar and Usman. It's like, he's Habib with kicks. What could you do? It's like, well, no, that's not exactly what's going on. But also the kicks, a lot of the kicks... Firstly, the kicks are often naked because he throws them from long range with the intention of setting up a shot on your counter. Because his hands aren't particularly great, he throws these kicks and then you step in to punch, or you try and punch him back off the kick and he ducks on your hips. That's how he got Morozov downloads. That's how he got Maness downloads. It's striking from a range that's beyond the dangerous range for most people. Certainly like Nate Maness is basically just a boxer. But one of the things that I really would love to see more people do is... Bruh. Nah, go listen to the Boicast. I'm not giving away secret anti-Nurmagomedov techers for free.